please. And welcome to this week's Field Notes Live. Hope everybody is well and not suffering too much from the heat wherever you are, because it seems like everywhere is hot at the moment. It's quite draining, or it can be. So hopefully you're drinking a lot of water, keeping nice and hydrated. And like I say, welcome to this week's live. It's all been about finishing the horse's sentence this week. So communication or interruption. And as I said in my Field Notes in Motion, if you've watched that, which is the full episode is up on YouTube, it does sound like we're talking about the same thing, because interruption is still a form of communication. But during the observation that I made with the horses this week, because every time I do one of these, or we talk about a subject, or I focus on a subject, it's always come from an observation that I've had with the horses within the herd, looking and watching the horses do stuff. And it was really interesting this week watching a conversation, a dialogue, an interaction between Charlie and Parker, where it was evident that interruption was the main foundation of what was going on between the two of them. So it really is, when is interruption not part of the communication, or it takes over from the communication? And when we're talking about ourselves, it's when interruption rather than communication becomes our go-to dialogue. And I've been thinking about this all week after what I saw the boys doing. And I realized something, that perhaps the reason that this topic really resonates with me so deeply has got nothing to do with horses at all. It begins much earlier than that. I want to share with you a little bit about my childhood and why, when I was watching that conversation, that dialogue between Parker and Charlie, why this was quite a deep feeling for me. So as a child, I found communication incredibly difficult. I knew what I wanted to say, but the words didn't always arrive when everyone else was expecting them to. There would always be a pause while my brain was searching for that next word, that next piece of the sentence. And people become uncomfortable with silence, particularly when it's within a flow moment, or they're trying to extract information. So, thinking they were helping me as a child, they would jump in with the word that they thought I was looking for, or they would finish my sentence for me, or move the conversation on. It's not that they were being unkind. In fact, I think it was quite the opposite. I think they were trying to help. But now, looking back and having spent this week thinking about this topic, I wonder who they were trying to help. Was it me to save my embarrassment, or was it them to save themselves from the silence? When it did happen, when they did jump in, inevitably, it was incredibly frustrating for me, as usually, almost always, they got it wrong. And every time they did, I felt a little less seen. That pause wasn't the end of my thought. It was part of my thinking. It was part of my retrieval process, part of my processing. Eventually, it became easier not to say anything at all, rather than them keep correcting me or helping me, which meant that I was correcting them. So I just became quieter, not because I had nothing to say. I had plenty to say, but it just felt easier than constantly having my thoughts interrupted. It was easier to silence myself, to go into myself, to go inward, than to maintain a dialogue that I was unable to finish. And I've only recently realized how much that experience shapes the way I watch horses. And I wonder how often we do exactly the same thing to them. We ask a question, and before they finish thinking, we've already decided that what the answer should look like, but more importantly, when it should be offered. And if there is more than a pause, we become uncomfortable. So we repeat the cue. We will change our position. We encourage, we reassure, we help. But what we're really doing is finishing the horse's sentence. The impatience isn't usually unnoticed. And just like those that were trying to help me, the space we fill is because we care, or we feel awkward with not knowing when the answer will come, and the horses notice. This morning, I went for a forage walk with Champ in hand. We left the property and wandered into places that he's been before, but where every day is always a little different because nature is nature, and they change by time of day and each day of the week, because nothing's the same twice when we talk about nature. And I made a quiet decision before we left. I wasn't going to lead the walk. I was going to walk with him. So every step he took, I took. Every time he stopped, I stopped. I didn't take another step until he chose to. Now, that didn't mean I gave up my responsibility. If he'd made a choice that wasn't safe, of course, I would have stepped in. That's part of my role. But as long as we were both safe, I let the pauses belong to him. And something changes when we do that. We begin to realize that the pauses aren't empty, they're full. He's listening, he's smelling the air, he's looking further ahead than I am, he's noticing something I haven't noticed yet. He's gathering information before deciding what comes next. And if I'd kept walking, I'd have interrupted all of that. I'd have assumed that because nothing was moving, nothing was happening, but everything was happening. And I wonder how often that's true in our work with horses. Perhaps we're not waiting for the horse to answer. Perhaps we're waiting for movement. And those are not the same thing. Maybe this is one of those quiet yet really profound lessons that horses keep trying to teach us. Thinking has its own pace. Nature has its own pace. Not every pause needs filling. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is trust that another mind is still in the middle of forming the response. This week, if you take nothing else away from these field notes, I'd love you to take this. The next time your horse pauses, become curious, not about what you'll do next, but what about your horse might still be doing. You may find that the conversation was never lost. If today's field notes have given you something to think about, please let me know in the comments. I'd love you to subscribe and join me for next week's observation. Until next time, keep noticing.